So I totally would have done this episode on Pierce Pulchus, but there's only so many minutes I can fill with saying he's a little Hi everyone, and welcome to Secondary Wizards, Episode 2. In our last episode, we looked at Minerva McGonagall and the power of tough love, and today we're moving on to Chapter 2 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Today we're talking about Vernon Dursley and the quest for normalcy. So if you are following along with the videos, but not necessarily reading along, and you want a brief recap of what happened in the chapter, here goes. Basically, this is the chapter where the Dursleys, Harry, and a little turd named Pierce Pulchus go to the zoo. It's Dudley's birthday. Mrs. Fig broke her leg, or did she? And so Harry gets to go to the zoo. When they get to the zoo, Dudley is harassing a snake because it won't move. And then Harry goes and talks to the snake and says, yeah, man, I totally understand because that's normal to relate with snakes. Then Dudley sees the snake moving, he comes over and he harasses Harry, and then Harry makes the glass disappear, says this weird, thanks, amigo. That's what snakes sound like. And Vernon freaks out because magic. So that's what happened. And I want to focus on Vernon when talking about this chapter because he seems like the driving, aggressive force in the Dursleys' obvious desire to be normal. And we see how striving to be normal actually impedes a lot of progress and growth all around Vernon. So when we get to Privet Drive, we're told that it basically hasn't changed in roughly 10 years, which means from 1981 to 1991, this neighborhood has remained relatively untouched. And that's our first hint that this quest to be normal has actually impeded growth. All the while, we see evidence that the one aspect of the Dursley family that's perhaps untraditional, which is, having an orphaned nephew in their family, they've gone to great strides to hide him. Not only is he physically being forced to stay under the stairs instead of in a spare bedroom where all of Dudley's toys are, but they don't have any photos of him around, so to a guest or to someone visiting, he doesn't exist. So from the very beginning, we see how a strive to look like a normal nuclear family is actually resulting in the neglect and abuse of a child. And we are told from the very beginning of this chapter that the first rule in living a quiet life with the Dursleys is don't ask questions. And what's implied by that rule that, Harry is obviously aware of is that curiosity and imagination and new knowledge are considered bad things in this house. So when we know that Vernon's rule is don't ask questions, what that really tells us is that Vernon doesn't want Harry, or maybe even his children, maybe even his wife, to have curiosity, to have imagination, to even think what magic might be. Vernon knows that asking questions leads to new knowledge. If we want to be normal, we sort of don't want to learn all the ways that we can be different. Vernon is reintroduced in this chapter after a 10-year hiatus from chapter 1 with a command. He tells Harry to comb your hair. And that sounds like a cliche throwaway. It's just a gruff line that maybe any dad on a sitcom would say. But what that line points to is that Vernon is obsessed with things being out of place. Even Harry's hair, and he finds being out of place dangerous. He doesn't want to appear out of place, and he doesn't want his surroundings to appear out of place. He is threatened by a lack of normalcy, by a lack of order. And I think this chapter shows us that how this quest for order and normalcy actually does a lot of damage to the people around Vernon. So in a somewhat funny bit, we learn through Harry that it's been years since Dudley has actually cried as opposed to fake crying to get something he wants. And that reads as funny, or it reads as manipulative, but I can't help but feel some pity for Dudley. I can't help but wonder how Vernon's upholding of the norms of masculinity perhaps has harmed Dudley. Why hasn't he cried? What does that tell us about the way he lashes out or the way that he handles his emotions? Why has he been taught that truly crying is not okay, but that it's normal to throw a tantrum? To that point, we also see that Vernon sees it as a virtue when Dudley complains about the number of presents he has when he throws this tantrum. Little Tyke wants his money's worth, just like his father. What kind of a businessman is he? You will buy every drill. You bought 30 drills last year. You're gonna buy 31 orders of drills this year. He sees it as masculine, as a reflection of himself, as normal in this capitalistic world to demand more. And what does that tell us about the way we teach young men that it's normal to demand what they want? And what does that even mean for Dudley, who has inherited that normalcy and feels pressure or feels compelled to act on it? What could Dudley have been in a different environment where he was allowed to be curious, allowed to cry, allowed to have an imagination? And of course, the biggest victim of both Vernon's and Petunia's desire to appear normal is Harry. We see Vernon threaten Harry with even more time in the cupboard under the stairs if, there's any funny business. So much of the neglect and disdain that this child has faced has been a result of things outside of his control, being extraordinary or exhibiting things that weren't ordinary in the eyes of the Dursleys. We also see Vernon nearly burst a vein in his neck because Harry had the audacity to dream about a flying motorcycle. I had a dream about a motorcycle. It was flying. Motorcycles don't fly! So Vernon doesn't even know that this is how Harry arrived at Privet Drive. He doesn't know Hagrid yet. He doesn't know that that's how Harry got to his doorstep. But so deep is his fear of the abnormal, of magic, he moves to squash all imagination. And that proves very dangerous from all the Dursleys, who until the very end are sort of incapable of imagining the danger that Harry is in through all of these books, and they're incapable of imagining how that danger could come to their doorstep. I think we should also mention an uncomfortable truth, that one of the ways in which Harry is a victim of Vernon's obsession with normalcy is that he has not completely escaped being conditioned into looking for normalcy, into desiring normalcy. Now, in some ways we see this in Harry in ways that are very common for kids, right? He wants to have friends, he wants to be loved, he wants clothes that fit. These are all very typical ways that kids strive for normalcy. Kids don't want to be bullied because their clothes don't fit. Kids don't want to be alone because they don't have friends. If it's seen as normal to have friends, if it's seen as normal to have nice things, of course kids want that. And we understand that. You can also see Harry desiring so much to be normal because he knows that that's what receives love in this world he's been brought up in, that he attempts to explain away the extraordinary things that he is capable of with very mundane reasons. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. Really, Harry? Not the smartest. That's why he needs Hermione. He doesn't even think twice about the fact that maybe he's extraordinary. He just strives so much to have normal explanations for who he is. But I think we should also mention that Harry being conditioned into valuing normalcy plays out in an unfortunate way in this chapter, and that is his depictions of Dudley's weight. Throughout this chapter, we have access to Harry's inner thoughts, as we will through most chapters in this book. And continuously through this chapter, we see him associate Dudley's size with his character. We hear him refer to Dudley as a pig or a gorilla to himself. And by picking out the one thing about Dudley that seems beyond the scope of normal in Harry's world, in this case, Dudley's weight, Harry reveals his own unfortunate biases. Now, some readers would be right to argue that maybe this is an authorial bias that exists, especially early on in these books. Like many fantasy stories, physical appearance is often used to suggest character traits. But I don't want to let Harry off the hook because while I cannot know for sure what authorial intent is in this chapter, I do know that I have access to Harry's thoughts. And that having been brought up by Vernon, who values so much appearances, Harry has internalize that in a bit. And the one way in which he is maybe more normal than Vernon and Dudley is and normal's in quotation marks, is in his thinness. And he seems to project a bias onto Dudley and associate Dudley's seemingly horrid character with his body size. And that's unfortunate, and that's an unfortunate consequence of Harry being raised in this sort of environment. So if we return to the zoo, and that moment when the glass is removed from between the world of the snake and the world of Dudley, we see Vernon's worst fear coming to fruition. And why is that his worst fear? Why is his worst fear something extraordinary happening? Because ultimately when the glass disappears, Vernon's worst fears are coming true. Harry is exhibiting magic, something inexplicable is happening, and it will lead Vernon in the chapter to come after this to go to extreme and abusive means to maintain a normal facade over his family. And we see how tightly Vernon holds on to that normalcy, and I think we need to think about the ways in which we do that in our daily lives. Often the most harmful abuses we do on ourselves are policing what's extraordinary about ourselves in order to appear more normal, or in order to blend in. There's a fear of sticking out, And for good reason, often sticking out has meant persecution. Harry knows that well in this chapter, which is why he strives so much to be normal. But if we want to resist our inner Vernon, we have to learn to embrace what is abnormal about ourselves and the people around us. And it takes a certain imagination and curiosity to get past that natural desire to be normal or to blend in. It takes a curiosity to figure out what it means to survive in that world where you do let yourself be different. We're all putting a piece of ourselves in a cupboard under the stairs if we let normalcy dictate our lives. Dumbledore will later caution Harry when he's sitting in front of the mirror of Erised not to dwell on dreams. Even later in the books, with the pensive, he will say that curiosity is not a sin, but that we should be cautious with it. We should be careful with curiosity. But where Vernon goes wrong as compared to Dumbledore is in trying to shut those things out entirely. When the zookeeper keeps asking, "Where did the glass go?" it feels like a projection of Vernon's driving question and driving life force. Since Harry has arrived on his doorstep, the glass that once separated Privet Drive from funny business has vanished for Vernon. The glass that he has tried to put around the people in the world that he considers abnormal so that, he and Petunia could gawk at them over their hedges but not interact with them, not share power with them, that glass is gone. And that scares a person like Vernon Dursley. Vernon is a coward. We don't have to be. Luckily, it doesn't take an act of magic to remove the glass or to remove the closet door that makes so many people feel like they are trapped in a prison of normalcy or in a prison of desiring to be normal. All it takes is allowing more people to be themselves and to be free.